Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Live Code Tuesdays. My name is Sohan, I'm a dev advocate with Fermion, and today we are going to talk about building a serverless app with Spin and htmx. We hear all the cool kids are using htmx, and if you've not used htmx before, that's perfect because Thorsten here is going to tell us a little bit about what htmx is and how you can use it with Spin. Shout out to all the folks joining our stream again. I see David again from Dallas. Dallas, how's the weather in Dallas, David? I'm quite curious. We have Sim as well who says hello. We have Marcus. Nice to see you all. Thorsten, second time on Live Code Tuesdays, I think.
Yes, that's right. So first of all, thanks for having me. And also from my side, welcome everybody and thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, sweet. All right, so let's dive straight into this. We're going to give a quick introduction about what htmx is. We will do a lot of live coding. Well, the name of the show is Live Code Tuesdays, but some people might not have context about htmx because it's a fairly new framework. So we're going to spend a little time talking about htmx, right? And Thorsten's been nice enough to prepare a few slides as well. So Thorsten, over to you. Yeah, David says it's very nice in Dallas. Although it's going to be hot in summer. Yeah, I hear summers in Texas are pretty hot. Thorsten, we aren't too far apart. How's the weather there? It's pretty crappy here, I must say, in Amsterdam.
Yeah, same for me. I mean, the good thing it's not raining at the moment. That's all I can say about the weather over here. But yeah, hopefully we will get some spring weather conditions in a few weeks.
Soon. All right, so Thorsten, let's dive into what Spin and htmx is. And yeah, once we lay that context, we can go into some live code.
All right, so the slides should be on screen right now.
Yes, it is.
Yes, cool. All right, yeah, as Sohan already mentioned, I want to give you a brief introduction of what htmx is, and then we will jump right into the terminal and VS Code and build an app with Spin and htmx, just to get you going, to give you a sense of how things could work when you take Spin on the one side and htmx in the front end to craft something, to build a small app or maybe even a bigger app. So without further ado, let's jump right into what htmx is. So first of all, it's an open source project. There's a GitHub repository or also an entire organization on GitHub where you can find all the source code. They have created documentation out on htmx.org, and they also run an X account that you can follow to get latest and greatest news. To put it simply, and we will go into all the terms in a sec, htmx is a hypermedia-oriented front-end library. So that's a mouthful, right? What does that mean? So basically, it is enhancing HTML instead of replacing some capabilities of HTML with JavaScript, right? By adding more and more JavaScript that we as application developers have to use in order to build something.
Thorsten, I thought the world wanted more and more JavaScript frameworks. So
yeah, basically, I mean, htmx is built in Java, is written in JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
But instead of making us writing more and more JavaScript, it's extending the HTML markup. So we have a bunch of HX or HX star attributes that we can use to enhance existing web applications and make them maybe a little bit more dynamic, or make them behave like users may know it from single page applications, right? That you click something and you immediately get a response without having that flash where the entire web page gets reloaded, so to say. And htmx contributes a bunch of features that we all know from the web by adding specific HX attributes. So for example, we can issue web requests by just putting in new attributes to existing HTML nodes, or we can use WebSockets, server-side events, and we can make it look nice. I mean, I'm not good in making things look nice, but we can bring in CSS transitions easily to make the app a little bit nicer, so to say. But I colored that hypermedia term in that slide. So there are plenty of definitions what hypermedia actually means, and I want to quote Carson Gross. So he actually built htmx, and he referred to it as hypermedia is media such as text. So it's not limited to text that has hypermedia controls in it. So defining one term by adding another term, it's kind of neat, right? So what are hypermedia controls? So if we look at web pages in from a more general perspective, right? We have different tags that we use to describe how the UI should look like, or how the browser should render the app and behave upon user action. And as of today, we have two hypermedia controls. The first one, so here's a small snippet representing a regular HTML page, right? And in line 7, we have a traditional link or an anchor tag. And this is the first hypermedia control that we have. So we can click this thing, that link that says, let's get started, right? And then a request is issued to the server. There, some processing happens. The server constructs an entire new HTML page, returns that back to the browser, and the browser will then, wipe the document that we were looking at, and renders the new page. And for those of you that have done a couple of front-end or built some web pages, you may guess what the second hypermedia control is. It's the form tag, also starting in line 7 over here, that allows us to, for instance, send a post request to that register endpoint over here, and send the data that is stored in that input field with the name fname for first name. And we invoke, or we issue that request by hitting the button of type submit. So those are the two hypermedia controls that we have for decades right now. And the process is always the same, right? So again, to illustrate that one, the user clicks.
Sorry, Thorsten, just before, sorry to interrupt, but I think a few people just joined the stream. So just to set context again, we are talking about building a serverless app with Spin and htmx. And Thorsten here is giving us a quick run through of what htmx is, because it's a fairly new framework. Thorsten, can you pull up the slide about the definition of htmx? I thought that was a nice one. So yes,
this one?
Hypermedia is media that has hypermedia controls in it. I love that. If you see htmx's brand, it's very self-referential. It's very meta. There are a lot of memes, and it's also, I think there's a tradition in tech of recursive abbreviations, like GNU stands for GNU's not Linux, or I think PHP, the P also stands for PHP, right? If there are more examples that you can tell me, that would be good. So I just love this code.
It's I try to figure out a different definition, or come up with a different, maybe more self-explaining definition, but I ended up loving this quote, this sentence from Carson, so I just put it as a quote in here. And we can take it from there and get started quickly to actually see the app crawling.
We have a question, Thorsten, from Marcus,
Sure.
which says, as far as I know, HTMX is glued to the website with a JS link. Can we use HTMX with browsers that have JS disabled? Oh, interesting.
So basically HTMX is written in JavaScript. So if you're running or trying to run it in an environment that's so restricted that you're not allowed to invoke JavaScript, I don't think that's going to work, because somehow those additions, like those HX attributes, must be interpreted in some way, right? So I don't think that it's going to work if JavaScript is entirely disabled.
Right. I think even Bunny sort of agrees. Welcome to the show, Bunny, one of our regular viewers. Always love to have you here. And even Bunny says, as far as I know, no, because it requires a JavaScript import of the htmx JavaScript package. All right, that's a smart way of doing it, but yeah, okay. Sim has joined in. Oh, that's a good one. I think YAML stands for YAML ain't markup language. Nice. I always, for some reason, thought it stood for yet another markup language, but no, you're right that it's also recursive. That's cool.
Hey, really? Okay. I also thought it was yet another markup language, but
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Cool. And yeah, welcome Adam, who was on our stream last week, and also Rajat from India. Go ahead, Thorsten. We were talking about htmx.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, if you have any questions, don't hesitate, just ask, and so on. Keep on interrupting me in order to, so that we can answer all the questions, right? Okay, yeah, as we said, there are two hypermedia controls that we know and use for years right now. There's the anchor link in line 7 over here that we use to issue a GET request, and there's the form typically used in combination with the button of type submit that we can use to issue different kinds of requests, like an HTTP post request in this sample, where, for example, we register for a newsletter or for, I don't know, for something, right? Just to demonstrate, okay, these are the two types that we have today. And from a high level perspective, it always works the same way. We issue, or the user clicks on something in a web page, then we issue, or we send we get the URL, then the browser issues a request to that particular URL. Then some server, or maybe some serverless environment, does some thinking, some processing, right? And constructs a new HTML page. And the entire HTML page will be sent to the client as the payload of the HTTP response. And the browser replaces the current document with the HTML page that we received from server. So that's basically how web works, right? And there are some shortcomings or some, drawbacks, or maybe we want to build apps that are a little bit more efficient, more dynamic. And this is where htmx, at least from my point of view, really shines. So I have also taken that term from Carson that says generalizing hypermedia. So what htmx allows us to do is we can basically use any HTML element and make it behave like a hypermedia control. So for example, imagine having your a nice image being rendered in a web page. So we can take that image and say, hey, you image, if the user clicks on you, then we issue an HTTP GET request to the server. And it goes even farther, because we are not limited anymore to clicking on something. So we can take all the events that we have in the browser into context and use them, as the trigger to issue an HTTP request. Obviously, we can issue like HTTP GET, post, put, delete. We can embrace all the HTTP methods that we have access to. And the interesting thing, and this makes htmx personally to me so appealing, is that we don't have to return JSON, and we don't have to return entire HTML pages. Instead, we just simply return fragments. So how is, let's say, an item from a shopping list represented in HTML? And we can just return that HTML snippet to the client and fine granularly control where the browser should place that fragment to. So for example, what we will build in the demo is we will build a simple shopping list where we have some server-side component built with Spin and written in Rust that provides us some APIs so that we can retrieve a list of items from the server, we can add new ones, and we can delete items from the shopping list. And instead of relying on JSON, because then we have that hard barrier between server or cloud and the front end. And with htmx, we can bring those parts closer together. And this is especially interesting for smaller teams, or if you build a smaller app, right, where you don't have to come up with complicated contracts, how front end must call the backend, how backend returns. Instead, you can just focus on how should the final product look like, and you start, using one language on both ends. So those are.
Thorsten, sorry, I do have a question though, and forgive me for asking the most cliched question of all time, which is you mentioned that it works for smaller teams because of the contract between the front end and the back end. But as projects get significantly larger, and when you're working on, like, say, enterprise scale, does this sort of pattern and actually also work?
Yes, obviously, because I mean, usually if your project or your team grows, you have some sort of shared responsibility, but there are specialities where one subset of the team focuses on one area of the application, or another team, or maybe you split it even by teams, right? But you don't have to distinguish by technology at that point. You can distinguish by maybe application feature, maybe by a vertical. I don't know, maybe one team takes care about the admin interface, the reporting area of your application, whereas the other part of the team takes care of the actual application itself. But it combines, from my point of view, those two work streams that our industry tried to distinguish pretty hard, right? Front end and back end.
Yeah.
But in the end, you always have to meet at some point and agree upon how things work, how you send data from A to B. We still have that, but we maybe htmx has the potential to educate the, let's say, backend developer a little bit more, and think about how are those things that I return over HTTP, how are they used on the other side of the table, right?
Interesting.
Does-
Okay.
does that
Yeah,
make sense?
I think it does. There are a couple of questions though related with this. One is Dark Logid, I guess. First of all, thanks for the nerd trivia about Herd. I live for nerd trivia basically, so keep those coming. Would you place htmx somewhere using island architecture / micro front ends for a reference? So I think the question is, where would you place htmx, right? Like in all of these frameworks that exist, is this more of a micro front end? Is it, yeah?
Well, micro front ends are quite interesting, right? Because you typically so I found micro front-end architectures in scenarios where multiple teams build vertical or run through the entire stack from the front end to the back end once. So they have the ownership of that particular feature, and at some point they have like an application shell where they have to integrate with sibling front ends, and they may be implemented using different technology stacks. So for example, let's say one front end is crafted with Angular, the other one is crafted with React, and then you have to agree on a common denominator, right? How to interact with the sibling front end, although it might be written in a different technology. And I think htmx is just an additional opportunity how teams could build the front end for their service, so to say, if you think in services. So I think, yes, it's a valid alternative to single page applications, because it allows you to bring in a little bit dynamic, or make apps dynamic without introducing a full-blown single page application framework.
Nice. I think that's a super interesting way to think about it. Adam has a question, actually two questions, which is, I'd be a little scared of that, which is missing contracts could potentially backfire. Although he also says, on the other hand, that's how the GitHub front end works, as far as I know.
Yeah, I got your concern about backfiring when there are no contracts, but I always frame it like this. The question is, what's your barrier? Or where does your trust relationship ends, right? If you build APIs and third parties build on top of your APIs, then it's a good thing to have a strict contract so that everybody can agree on. But however, if you are responsible for building the entire or a full stack application, so to say, maybe there is not an actual need to introduce that strict contract between the API and your app, right? If the only reason for why the API exists is serving data to your app, then I would argue that the contract isn't that important. I mean, obviously, you have some sort of contract, right? If we will create an app, right, that when I enter a text, then a new item will be stored somewhere in the database, right? So that item must obviously follow a schema, so a contract, how it should look like.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are some contracts.
So it's a very existential sort of question and answer, I think. So yeah, welcome to Live Code Tuesdays. We do live coding and talk about existentialism in tech. Yeah, as David says, you need to be able to swap out the front end without breaking the back end and vice versa as well.
We can discuss about it. Yeah, sometimes yes, sometimes definitely. I mean, the question is, if you do REST by definition, right, then you end up with, especially if the only front end that you provide is like a web front end, right? You end up with a chatty interface where the front end always runs to the back and forth in order to present what the user needs. What I saw becoming way more popular is use case oriented APIs, HTTP APIs, right? Where you say, okay, we want to achieve X, and in order to get X up and running, we need that set of data. Behind the scenes, there may be a full-fledged CRUD and RESTful API, but maybe it's a little bit more pragmatic or a little bit more efficient to say, okay, over here we want to render a dashboard, and for a dashboard, we on the backend side, we collect all the data, and crunch that data, and I don't know, mutate it in the best form so that the front end can serve it efficiently. So there are, always those discussions that lead to pretty harsh and maybe to discussions, so to say.
Yeah, I think yeah, this is probably like a sidebar type conversation, because yeah, it is a fairly opinionated thing as well. We'll get back on track on the demo, Thorsten, and talk about how HTMX, you're allowed to place hypermedia fragments anywhere on a page, and how it does that, right? So
yeah. Cool. And with that, I was about summarizing it and heading over to the demo. So yeah, let's jump right into the demo. And instead of starting from scratch, we have prepared, let's say, the boilerplate. And at first place, I want to run you through what do we take as granted over here. So we created a Spin app, and let me bring up the manifest quickly, that basically consists of two components. So first, we have the file server component that most of you may already know, that we use to serve files via HTTP. And in our case, this one is responsible for serving the index HTML, some fairly simple style sheets and htmx and so on and so forth. And besides that, we have an API that's written in Rust that will expose the API that our htmx frontend will actually use. So that's from the Spin application setup point of view. Let's start with diving into the API. So that's a fairly simple Rust API, and as the imports already tell you, I'm using SQLite to persist items on that shopping list, and we have basically 3 handlers over here. One to receive the list of all items at /API/items, one that accepts a post request, listening for requests that target /API items as well. And last but not least, a handler that responds to delete requests that target /API/items and an ID parameter, so a route parameter, so to say. For to represent our item, we have an identity. Every item has an identifier and a potential value, right? Which is just basically a string. So let's go through quickly. Jump over those different handlers. So forget all. We go to SQLite. We ask, hey, please select the ID and the value from the items table and order it by ID. Then we construct a new item, right? And we return the list of all items that we found in SQLite via HTTP. And right now, as a starting point, we expose it or we return it as a list of JSON or as a JSON array. On the way in, so we take a look at the HTTP request, we extract the item over here, and then we establish the connection with SQLite, and we insert the new item in the table of items. The ID will be auto-generated by SQLite, so we don't have to care about that one. And we just simply return a 200, although, we could return an 201 with a location header, but I thought let's keep it as simple as possible for now. Okay, last but not least, there's the delete one handler, which tries to extract the ID from the route. If there is no ID, we return a 404. If there is an ID, but it's not, or we are not able to parse it into an I64, we respond with an HTTP 400 bad request. So we as callee, we made something wrong. If everything's fine, we establish the connection and we delete the item from the table and return response default, which is basically an HTTP 200 again. And if there is in the case of an error, we return an HTTP 500. So that's like the starting point for our sample, right? By the way, this is open source on GitHub, and we will definitely share on. There is the link already. Thanks, Sohan. So on top of that, we have this migrations SQL. So that's me just creating that items table, setting the ID column as primary key with an auto increment, and having the value column of type text, which does not allow null values. So I think it's worth giving that a try. So we can simply say spin up. Oh no, let's do a build first. There we go. And let's do a spin up, and there we can pass SQLite as an argument and reference that migration.sql file. So when I specify the SQLite argument, Spin will load the file content, so that SQL statement from migration SQL, and ensure that that SQL gets executed upon bootstrapping the application. So let's do that. And we end up with the API being exposed at localhost 3000/API, and the app, so the static file server, we haven't looked at that, on the root route. So before we take a look at the app, I have installed an extension in VS Code over here that's called, I think it's called RESTbook. That one? Yeah, RESTbook. And RESTbook allows you to create .restbook files, which is basically something like Jupyter Notebooks just for HTTP requests, where we can mix and match Markdown and HTTP requests. So if we, for example, let me clear all the outputs, read all items, then we should receive an HTTP 200 and an empty array. Okay, let's go ahead and create one. So let's create a coffee, or let's add coffee to the shopping list. Let's again go there, and we get back an array that contains one item with ID of 1 and value of coffee. And if we want to, we can issue a delete request. We get back HTTP 200 again. We go back to give me all the items, get back an empty list, but let's re-add coffee. So we have one item in our database right now.
Yeah, Thorsten, quickly, I'm going to jump in because someone says congrats on joining Fermion. Because Doc Lajit says, hey, I'm German, although in Singapore. Thorsten joined the company a month ago, so congrats to joining. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Also, there's a follow-up question about that, Thorsten, which is, haven't you Spin used to SQLX? Looking at the string literals for queries, is there any support or plan for compile time checks in connection execute? Actually, go ahead and answer, but I also want to look up something in the meanwhile.
To be honest, I don't know. So maybe we can push that question while one is trying to figure out an answer. Is that right?
Yeah, I think Ivan, who's one of our colleagues, was actually looking at something like this. I'll have to stalk his GitHub a little bit. Yeah, although if there's anyone in the chat who has any ideas, yeah, do let us know. Also, yeah, I think RESTbook seems like a pretty cool tool. So yeah, TIL, I didn't know about that as well. Rajat didn't, but I think Adam and Marcus seem to be fans as well. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I like it as well because you can just push it to GitHub, right? And everybody could just try, get started quickly. And that's, I think, worth it.
Also, if you missed the first half of the stream, we were thinking of recursive acronyms in tech like GNU and YAML and stuff. So Bunny nerd sniped me a little saying we need one for Spin, and this is what I've come up with so far, but I'm open to suggestions. Just Spin provides infinite nuance, but I had to focus on the stream and think about it, so it's not my best work, but open to suggestions.
All right. So should we continue with the run? All right. So we have a fairly simple, let's say, Spin application that exposes some data as JSON via HTTP and accepts some JSON data. And we have an existing HTML app. And as you can see, it's just a boilerplate, right? You don't want to see me writing that from scratch. I don't want to do it neither. Yeah, we have like an HTML. We have a header over here, just some H1, some plumbing. Then we have the main part of our application where we want to render at some point in time all the items. And we have an aside, so we can use semantic HTML as we want to use it, right? Where we can add new items to the list. And again, you see a form. We are still missing some attributes, but no worries, we get there. Where you can enter a new text for a new item, and with our submit button, that we can click in order to issue a request. And last but not least, we have a footer just to make it somehow look nice. I'm not a designer by far not, so sorry for that. And besides, yeah, there's some fundamental style sheets that I wrote that are already loaded as part of the HTML over here. And with that, we want to bring in htmx. So let's bring up a terminal over here. And let's move to the app folder. And there I have two curl commands, that will basically go to CDN and grab the minified version of htmx in the first place. So the htmx documentation will guide you through and point you exactly to unpkg.com, htmx.org, and so on and so forth. But what was that warning? Let's ignore that warning for now. Besides htmx itself, htmx offers extensions that we can use to alter the default behavior. So let's cycle back to VS Code. So we will use a form, right? Because that's what we tend to use in order to deal with user input. And by default, if you submit a form, data is sent as form data over the wire to the API. However, our API wanna deal or accepts JSON, and we can use the htmx extension for JSON to instruct htmx, hey, instead of sending this, let's say, new item, the value over here, as form data, send it as JSON, which makes it, easier to integrate maybe with existing APIs. So let's bring in the second script over here, which is curl, the JSON encoding extension, also from the same CDN. So we end up with index.html, both htmx JavaScript files and styles.css. All right, with that, we can move on and just go over here and bring in script tag to load htmx.min.js. And let's copy that one and bring in JSON encoding. I think that's not minified. And so at least the file name does not stand that it's minified. So those are all the requirements we have to fulfill when we, start from a very basic HTML page. And now we can start adding progressive enhancements, meaning we can bring in those HX attributes to the existing HTML code base. So let's scroll up a little bit, and we have the main node over here. So what we want to do, or what we expect from a user's point of view, is when we visit our web page, then we want to obviously a list of all items, right? So htmx allows us to put hx tags on every node. So the first set of hx attributes that you will discover are those that are suffixed with an HTTP method. So for example, we can say, hey, htmx, please issue a GET request to the following route, that is API/items. So with that, htmx will issue an AJAX request to our API to load the items from the database. Right now, it still returns JSON. We will take care about that in a second. So one of the value propositions of htmx is that we can fine granularly place HTML fragments somewhere. And we can do that with hx target. So we can say, hey, no matter what you receive, go and place it into all items. On top of that, we can say how or what part of that HTML of that element that sits behind that CSS selector should be replaced. So we can say hx swap the inner HTML. So basically, if we receive the list of items back, we want to replace everything between the opening and closing div with the ID all items. And now the question is, when should that trigger? So by default, you remember those hypermedia controls? We have to click them. With htmx, we can do a hx trigger, and we can, for example, say on load. So when this particular DOM element gets loaded, we issue the HTTP request to the backend. All right. So from front-end side, we remember our get all. This one, that's returning JSON. Recalling the presentation, htmx expects us returning HTML fragments. And now it heavily depends on your programming language of choice, how you can achieve transforming your object array into HTML. And the good thing is we can use modules, packages, or in Rust crates. So we can take a look at the ecosystem of our programming language and try to find valuable packages where someone already maybe achieved that task, and we can use them, right? And that's what we want to do right now. So let's go to API instead. And in Rust, we have Cargo, the build tool, and also for managing dependencies. And there is a crate that's called build HTML. So let's install that. And now let's open code over here, because Rust Analyzer is then a little bit happier, so to say. So I've added build HTML over there in the latest version. Build HTML provides you or gives you a DSL, so domain-specific language, so, or like a fluent API that you can use to create HTML fragments. On top of that, it gives us a trait that we can implement for our individual structs to specify how a particular item will look like in HTML. And this is quite handy. So we can simply say, hey, let's impl the HTML, and Rust Analyzer needs a minute. Let me kill this thing quickly and do a in build, and then it complains, the Rust compiler, it complains one time, and let's open up API again, and then the tooling should be in place, I hope. That's indexing, and import. Now I can do the import, and now I can say, hey, implement missing members. Yes, and there's some glitch in my tooling over here. And with that, we see we have to implement a toHTML string method, right? So we have a single method that we have to implement. We can freestyle here, right? We can just use, for example, format and say it looks like this, right? We can do whatever we want. But this is where build HTML, that small, tiny crate, really shines. We can go ahead and use the DSL, the domain-specific language provided from build HTML. And this allows us to build, fragments using a fairly simple DSL. So let's say this is a div, and our div should have some attributes. Attributes are vector, so we can add multiple attributes to our div node. So for example, we can add a CSS class over here so that, the style sheet in the front end picks it up and makes it look nice. And we want to render an item. On top of that, we may end up with a list of items. So we would act like a good citizen developer, right? To add an ID to that one so we can address it explicitly. So we can use format over here and say this is item placeholder, and there we say self.id, and I think we have to do an stir over here. And then the rest analyzer won't come over there. Okay, so this leaves us with div class item ID item -1.
I'm curious, Thorsten, purely
Yeah.
from like a programming point of view, right? Absolutely only looking at it from a programming point of view. Does it take a big difference to sort of think in htmx in terms of, how like these components are sort of swapped out, and is there a big mental shift to do that? Especially if you come from like a React Angular type world?
Some sort of, yeah. So Angular, for example, is a holistic application framework, right? There are opinionated components. There is a certain way how you should build things. They have complex, let's say complex things in place like dependency injection and app initializers and whatnot. In contrast, React focus on the view layer, right? And you bring in additional libraries to make it an application framework. And htmx, from my point of view, it would be a fair comparison to React, although we don't have to introduce virtual DOM and concepts like that. So it's just a library of progressive enhancements, small like Lego blocks that we can use maybe to enhance existing applications or I think also to build bigger applications. So from the front end point of view, I think the shift isn't that big. There were similar libraries years ago when there was that rise of HTML5 with the data star attributes. Backend point of view, I mean, this one is the, okay, let's show how you can build it. In a real world scenario, you would typically end up doing something like content negotiation, right? Where you look at the HTTP request, and if the request asks you for text HTML content type, then you may return the HTML representation, like that's what we are heading to. And if the client asks for, let's say, JSON, then you invoke the method that returns the items as JSON, and then you are able to serve both needs. So yes, I guess on the backend side, there's a slightly bigger thought process involved to make it robust and reliable and to address multiple concerns. On the front end side, at least for me, I found it very refreshing and super easy to grasp the fundamentals of htmx.
Okay, nice. Because I think that's, personally at least, that's one of the things I struggle with sometimes when looking at like a new framework or a new language, where you have to sort of change your mental model to match the mental model that they expect. Right? So I was wondering with HTMX, because I've never tried it before, if there is like a fairly steep learning curve there, where you throw out everything you've learned before to sort of learn HTMX.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, the concepts are, so the HTMX team did a great job of laying out the concepts and the idea behind the framework, right? The tooling is fairly simple. At some point, we are so used to work around the limitations of HTTP and HTML as from a front end point of view, right? That we have to just go back a step and maybe look at it from a different point of view. But,
Yeah. Dark Logic has a question, which is,
yeah.
how do we handle escaping in this backend generates the HTML fragment type method, I'm guessing, yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can. What do you mean exactly by escaping? Escaping, like if you want to send JavaScript via via that particular string, or what do you think about escaping over here? Because I mean, basically, there is a so-called sanitizer that we can control what or how things are transferred from OLEFU. Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, we can sanitize that one in order to prevent JavaScript from being injected when we actually just look for the uh, for the data represent or the visual representation of those items. Um, but yeah, that's definitely a good and a concerning point. Um, I don't know if CSP helps. So with my setup, CSP does not help because I run on this in my setup. The front end and the back end is served from the same origin, right? Where if you serve your front end from one origin and the API from a different origin, then you could restrict that via CSP. So content security policy in the client. I'm so used to saying CSP, sorry. um, that you can say, okay, I just trust JavaScript that is served from my app web server or from my app origin. But maybe there are more sophisticated crates out there that may prevent you or your team from injecting JavaScript on the server side there.
Yeah. I'm guessing, yeah, this is what Dark Cloud is saying, which is could be a giant footgun to inject stuff from, like a database or something user generated into the front end code.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have the same the same concerns as you have with any web technology. On the way in, you have to ensure that that the user doesn't ingest some sort of SQL injection, or in that case, SQL or JavaScript injection. Obviously, I mean, those concerns are that's nothing where.
For all frameworks, right? Whatever,
Yeah.
all web, okay.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, there are frameworks or crates out there that could, but when speaking about Rust, that could help you in dealing with those scenarios. Yeah. Do we have more questions, or should we move
Yeah,
on?
we can carry on.
Okay, cool. So right now we have like this representation, right? And we can extend it from here that we say, okay, from that container or inside of that container right here, here we wanna, this one, we wanna place another div. So we can say with container, again, we have to say container type. Which one do we want? We want a div. And again, this one, let me arrange that. So this goes there. Yeah, again. So for that one, we say with attributes. Again, we use a vector. And again, we specify the class. And the class is so right now we build the value, the div where we will place the value. And with attributes, that's closed over here with, I think there is a with text, no, with raw, sorry. And let's move that a little bit up over here. So with raw, and we say, let's bring in self.value. And this is exactly where the questions are heading to. Okay, we just take the raw value right now and put it over here. Maybe it makes more sense to say, okay, put a label there and set the text to encode it, right? To prevent the client from receiving JavaScript and immediately executing it. But bear with me for the sake of demonstration to stick with that. Okay, so we have this one, and I think we have one missing. So we close that, and then we add, and I missed one of the. Yeah, I missed one thing. Container new, so that, and then we have to close it over here. I was fighting with the indentation already, and now we are back on track. Okay, so we have this. That's class equals value, and we have what we had coffee. We had coffee. Now let's add another div over here. Div. So we have to ensure that we are over here. That's the yellow one. And we are almost there. No worries. Container new. Container type is a div again. And again, we do with attributes. And we use a wag there. And we say a class delete item. Okay, and we add another one that says hx delete format, and we say EI/items/ this one, and provide a self ID, and again as stir and comma, and then it should be happy. So closing this one over there, and let's say withdraw, we add an X. Okay, that's the content. So there will be a class equals delete item, and so on and so forth, and there will be the red X over here. Now let's check. So we have our chain, and we have the width over there. Oh, and the width must be with container. And finally, we can say to HTML string, so that our function returns the holistic HTML representation for an item, right? It's basically a top level 1 div with 2 inner divs that I personally use to, lay out the things evenly on the horizontal axis. All right.
Quick shout out, folks. Sorry that we are at the top of the hour, but we'll probably extend by what, 5-10 minutes, Thorsten, perhaps.
Okay.
But if you want like a follow along, the code is open source on github.com/Thorsten Hans/spin-htmx. But if you also go to dev.to/Fermion, you'll find this as a link there. So you can follow along with the tutorial as well if you just want to check it out. Yeah, and Thorsten, over to you.
Okay, cool. So now we have that HTML the trait implementation in place. We have to take care about the actual handler, right? Because we just we collect all items and serialize them or hand them over as a vector of U8, right? Yep. Instead, we can do a simple map reduce over here. So we can map all items. So every item is an instance of our item struct. We can say, hey, on that item, call to HTML string, right? And from there, we can simply reduce it and say there's an accumulator in the current item, and let's format it again, saying this. And then we just use A, C, C, and E over there. So this we end up in as one big string containing all HTML representations. And for now, let's just say unwrap all. So what happens if something goes wrong? Let's just return an empty string for now. From empty string. Okay, that we end up with items being a string, right? And then we can get rid of that, and we can change this to text HTML and return items. Okay, let's give that a try. We go to our terminal, we clean up, we do a spin build. Isn't something missing? Yeah, there's something missing. Why is my class analyzer self? So this one, and string.from. Execute value found struct string. Okay. Map reduce default string. Yeah. This looks better. Okay. So once the Rust compiler is happy, we can do a spin up and again ensure that we pass the SQLite argument. Let's cycle back to this one and do code. Bring up the REST book and call the GET request again. And as you can see, we now get back the HTML representation. Great. So let's give it a try and let's do localhost 3000, right? And there we go. We see the header, we see a list of our items, and add a new one. Okay, this does not work yet. So let's go to VS Code back and let's add milk, right? Okay, milk has been added. Let's go to the browser. Sorry for black and white flashing. And we see coffee and milk. Great, so we have that. Now we have this button over here, which has an hx delete attribute on it, which when I press it, it deletes thing, but it cleans the surface. So we have to do some, if I reload the app, coffee is still there. So we need to, take it from here and bring in more htmx capabilities, so more hx attributes to make this work as expected. And let me go there. And in the first place, so we want to prevent the user from accidentally deleting items, right? So we place our items over here inside all items. So what we can do, we can say, hey, inside of this HTML element, confirm an hx delete may be issued. If that's the case, you can ask, do you really want to delete this item, question mark. And we want to, if the user responds with yes, we want to remove just a single item, which is the closest dot item. So
I really like this syntax. I mean, I think in cases like this, at least this syntax sort of, it pops out well. I really like the approach here that htmx uses, yeah.
I like it as well. I mean, you have to get used to all the selectors again. That took some time ago for me. But basically it says, hey, wherever the user clicks that red X, look for the closest div or element with the item class on it and remove that one. However, we don't want to remove it. So we are good, right? Good front-end developers. We don't want to simply remove it. We want to, go to the outer HTML. So that's the div with class equals item. And we want to hide or fade it out over the duration of 1 second. And I think that's it. So I've started the Spin app with Spin Up and SQLite, right? With the SQLite argument. We can add direct mounts. So every time we reload the browser, it goes to my local file system and reads the file again. So I don't have to restart the app again and again and again. Okay, so let's try again. Yeah, let's click the X. And right now we should see the item disappear. And disappearing should take a second. Obviously, I have to confirm it right now. And here you can use your own UI, right? The simplest one is the built-in browser confirmation dialog. That's the fallback default that htmx uses, but you can bring in a shiny model dialog or whatever. So let me confirm that. And then we see fading it out. So we can also bring in CSS transitions, and that's the point. So we can safeguard deleting items, and we can make it, look nice, so to say.
Nice. Very nice.
All right. Can I squeeze out additional 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, because we have that add new item to the list form. And again, that's the cool thing about htmx. It's so simple because we went through that right now 2 times, right? We specify what should happen, when it should happen, the trigger, and what should htmx do once the server comes back. Right now, we want our form has a button that submits the form, but the form has no clue about where it should be submitted to. So we can bring in hx, issue a post request to API/items, right? By default, it swaps the content of the element, but that would result in the form disappearing, right? So we can say hx swap equals none. And then we have some, hx has a concept of maybe hooks, or maybe you can also call it event. We can say hx on after request. And here we can inject JavaScript. So we can say this represents the current HTML element, the form, and the form has reset method, which clears the value from the form. And we should again see the placeholder that's mentioned over here, which says add item. So maybe you remember I added JSON encoding over here. By default, the data is sent as form data to the server. We can instruct htmx to use the JSON encoding extension by simply saying hx extension. Okay, and our intention is to use the JSON encoding extension.
Nice. I'm just highlighting this comment that Bunny had made on something similar some time ago on stream, which was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can also, yeah, exactly. Yeah, puts it also in a proper sentence. That's right. All right, so we have, let me quickly cycle through it so not that I miss something. hx post. If the form submitted, send a post request to API items. Swap nothing. Instead, once the request is finished, call a reset method on this HTML element. That's right, so the value should disappear. And upon sending, encode the form data into JSON. All right, so I saved that one. Let's go over here. So our list is empty. You see this little text jumping. So I'm refreshing the page, and let's try to add milk. All right, we see nothing, but the form is cleared, so something happened, right? Let me refresh the page again, and we see milk. We load the list when the page loads. So the final step is somehow we have to instruct the page to again re-evaluate, to load the list again. And to do so, we have a simple but efficient way to do that. We can go to our API, sorry. Upon adding a new item, so we return status code 200 with an empty body. We extend our API, and by the way, make it nice. So, by saying, hey, along with the HTTP 200, send an HTTP header called hx trigger, and call it maybe new item added. Okay. So once the item is added, we send back a custom hx header from the API. In the front-end side, we have the main node that goes and loads everything from the server, right? We can say this one should not only be triggered when the page is loaded, but also when let me copy that. Don't want to mess up this one. When this event happens on the scope of body, because that HX trigger is evaluated on the body and we have to scope that. So there's no magic happening here. That's all super documented on htmx.org, and the documentation guides you through scenarios like that one. Okay, now I have to restart the app once because I've made a modification to the API and I didn't start it with watch. So sorry for that one. Spin up. There we go. Let's do a final walkthrough. Refresh the page. There's milk. Let's add back coffee. And there we go. The list of items get updated automatically. And with that, we went through taking a regular HTML application with a Spin app, or a Rust API written, and transformed it into a Spin app that, just slightly small changes brought in some dynamic behavior into our web application and allowed us to build an end-to-end shopping list app that I can use, or at least my wife can use it, and make me buy the correct things on a weekly basis. Right?
Awesome. So first off, amazing demo, Thorsten. I just love how you explain and go through every single line of code. That's amazing. Since we went a little over time today, not too much time for questions, maybe we'll just take a couple, but feel free to jump into our Discord and ask us any follow-up questions you might have. The source is completely public. Oh, not here. Here you go. It's on Thorsten's GitHub, or also if you want to follow along to a tutorial, just go to dev.to/Fermion and you'll find it there. And couple of quick comments, which is from Bunny, which is, I'd like to see htmx support gRPC. Granted, gRPC is sort of fringe nut job stuff, but yeah, some people do like protobuf's benefits and things like that. Yeah, I don't know too much about the roadmap there. I don't know if you would, Thorsten.
Me neither. Sorry. I mean,
okay. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that we'll have to wait and watch, I guess, unless Carson Gross, I think, the guy who made htmx, is watching secretly. So yeah, and yeah, nice demo, as Marcus said. So yeah, awesome stuff, Thorsten. Cool. Since we are pretty out of time, I think we can wrap it up on this stream. Thorsten will be back, and so will I very soon. Next week, we have something slightly different. We're not going to be talking too much about Spin, although we will be talking about WebAssembly. We'll be talking about security and WASM security, especially using .NET. Right? So we have Neil Stannis joining us for the stream. It's going to be a little different, but I hope you join in. I think that's something pretty cool. I've seen him do a similar talk in different conferences, so I thought we should get him on the stream to check it out as well. Thanks everyone who watched. I know there's Sim, Marcus, Bunny, Adam, Dark Lajid, who else? David, Rajat, Radu, whole bunch of people. Thank you so much for watching. See you here next time, next week, same place, same channel. Thorsten, thanks again, and see you soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting and making this an amazing format.
Yeah. See you folks. Take it easy. Bye.
Bye-bye.